So next up, why did Initialized Capital invest in Instacart? So Gary Tan's introduction to Instacart is legendary. Many of you may have already heard the story, but for those who have not, Gary was a partner at Y Combinator at the time as he was concurrently starting Initialized Capital. But while at Y Combinator, a founder named Apurva Mehta emailed him asking if he could get into Y Combinator. And Gary had told him that the deadline has passed and that it would be nearly impossible to get him in now. Y Combinator is about a 10-week program. They were already 4 weeks in. But Mehta took that as an opportunity to showcase his business, which was Instacart. To prove that he had something special, he found Gary's address at the YC office and sent him a 6-pack of beer. And so, similar to the Brian Armstrong example, this exceptional cold email / product demo is just another incredible example of effectively pitching a venture capital firm however you can at any opportunity you get. Brian Armstrong sent Gary Tan some Bitcoin using his service Bitbank, now Coinbase, and Apurva doing a similar thing with Instacart, proving out the product. I mean, it shows VCs that you have hustle, you have confidence in your product, you can sell your product, you can sell the vision, and simply you actually have a product that does what you intended to do, which isn't always the case for founders at the seed stage. Sometimes it's just an idea or it's just a pitch deck. But here Apurva had the product built out and could actually test it and do a live demo from an app. And Instacart's ability to actually showcase the product was really notable because Uber had been out for almost 2 years now and was growing like a wildfire. So people could tell that the gig economy was going to be a thing, and grocery delivery was a natural next step. And so companies like Instacart were pitching their ideas to investors all the time, but that's all they were just ideas. It was such an initially capital intensive business model that any startup that actually tried to run the business would lose a lot of money. In fact, in the early days, Instacart was burning $30 to make $12. I mean, that is atrocious unit economics. If there was a $12 order or an order they'd make $12 on, Instacart would have to spend $30 to make that order happen. It's ridiculous. But despite that, Apurva was willing to build out the app himself and hire a few drivers on Craigslist to pick up the groceries when he was alerted of an order from the Instacart app, as an app that he was simultaneously updating with pictures of groceries that he had to buy himself from the store. I mean, despite it being a horrible business initially, Apurva was willing to build it out and test the thesis and show that this was something users wanted, despite the initially difficult unit economics. So, it wasn't the most efficient process, but it was more than a pitch deck. It showed he had hustle and he could actually build the product. And Initialized partner Jen Wolf actually talks about why founders like this are so appealing to the Initialized team. Is she once said, quote, "They're people who like to build things to solve problems, right? They don't want to just talk about it or research it. They're very action oriented." And they said, like, "I've identified this problem and this is how I'm going to start to figure out how to get product market fit or how to solve this problem. I'm going to create a product and put it out there. And that's going to be my main way of trying to understand whether this is something people want or need or like," end quote. And so I love this because, again, like, it's for an exceptional founder, it's not that hard to build the product. Sure, there's opportunity cost with time, and you may have to subsidize some early users, and you might have some early bad unit economics. But if you can actually get a product out to test your thesis, that makes you a lot less risky as an investment. Rather than just saying, we've done market research, we've spoken to some potential customers, like, that's great. But if you've done those things and built the product and actually have proof that users are using your product and loving your product and coming back to your product, that makes it a lot more appealing as an investment. So founders try to build that MVP no matter what it takes to just prove that it's working, and you'll have a lot more success raising capital. And so Apurva, founder of Instacart, aligned with Initialized thesis, which is typically to back a builder who was willing to prove out his or her hypothesis and scrappy enough to make it work themselves and prove it to investors. Obviously no VC would invest in a company that would have, such horrible unit economics, but Instacart had a plan that once it reached sufficient demand to, build out an actual gig economy, had economies of scale, and could start its eventual ad network to make some better profits off of the network, then it would actually be a profitable company, as we're finally starting to see today. But that certainly wasn't obvious at the time. I mean, a lot had to happen for Instacart to get there. And honestly, I'm not sure Instacart ever would have been successful without being able to build in the ZERP environment. I mean, again, such horrible unit economics, but capital was so cheap, they were able to just fund that cash burning machine in hopes that they would eventually hit scale to become profitable. It worked out. So it's certainly a great investment, but obviously a lot had to go right for Instacart to work. It was tough business. And Initialize could recognize that. They knew this would be tough, but they funded the company still because it aligned with Gary Tan's what he calls the 3 whys. And he describes them as follows. He says, quote, technology, behavior change, and government regulation. I want you to keep those in your mind as you evaluate any startup idea. Those aren't the only 3, but those are the ones that I have seen up close, and we funded dozens of billion-dollar startups that have made it based on those 3. Watch for the curious and interesting intersections between very large things. Look for the points of contact or points of conflict. Pick 2 enormous forces and wonder how they connect. And where those intersect is the one big question, why now? End quote. Like we touched on earlier, Instacart started at the perfect time coming off the heels of Uber. First, mobile smartphones created the opportunity to order, track, and deliver groceries. Second, the behavior was changing, both in the gig economy, becoming a place where regular people could easily pick up a second time or full-time job. And, users, consumers were getting more comfortable paying a premium on ordering things to be delivered to save time and for ease of use. And lastly, Uber had already done the hard fighting against government regulation for Instacart, allowing the gig economy to be a thing in the first place. So Instacart started at both the perfect time and probably as late as they possibly could, because typically when the 3 whys, again, technology, behavior change, and government regulation, typically when those 3 whys intersect, it's the best time to start a company. And that becomes more obvious to everyone else, to all your competitors, by the day. And so since Apoorva was a builder willing to test his thesis through an extremely compelling pitch by sending Gary Tan the 6-pack of beers and probably earning the badge of the latest Y Combinator applicant to be admitted, and because of Apoorva Mehta's timing of building Instacart at a time when Gary Tan's 3 whys were perfectly intersecting, Initialize decided to invest $150,000 into Instacart's seed round. Reportedly, Initialize did no follow-on investing, which they tend not to do, and so therefore they only had roughly a 0.2% ownership at the time of the IPO, according to some reports, which makes their stake worth about $17 million. But if they sold at the last round, at the $39 billion round at which Instacart was valued before their IPO, then their stake would have been worth about $74 million. So regardless, this maybe isn't a major sum compared to the Coinbase investment, again, $2.1 billion, but even at the IPO valuation, their $17 million return did grant them a 54% IRR and a 113x, which is a multiple many venture firms would kill for. And again, this was out of a $7 million fund. So a $17 million return is 2.5xing the fund, which is certainly a great investment. Or, if the partners at Initialize were savvy enough and returned $74 million on their Instacart investment, that's a 10x of the fund, again, of a $7 million fund. So sure, you can look at the numbers and say, 17 million, 74 million. It's not a lot of money, especially compared to some of the heavy hitters we talked about at Sequoia and Benchmark and Kleiner. But when you look at the actual multiples from a purely seed stage VC firm, now that's an exceptional return.